Hi, this is Paul. It's been almost 2 years since the Jordan Peterson Sam Harris debates. And part of the advantage of time is perspective. I'm not one of these geniuses that hears something and completely grasps it right away and can articulate it. It takes me time to learn, and over these last 2+ years, I've been doing a lot of thinking and working and talking and listening and trying to learn. A little later this week, I'm going to have a conversation with Ron Dart. Ron Dart was the editor of this book. We had one conversation about this book so far. At this point, the conversations flow where they will, but we're going to talk about Jordan Peterson and Roger Scruton. And so I re-listened to the Peterson Scruton video, and that kind of sent me back to the Peterson Harris videos, because I often get the question, well, what does Jordan want? What does Jordan Peterson want to do? What really is the essential aspect of what he wanted to accomplish in that first wave? And I think the heart of Jordan is to know how to live. That's what he's looking for. And actually, at the beginning of the Dublin talk, I think Sam Harris quite nicely laid out what their common project was, and in the scope of this video, we'll show where they diverge. Now, I'm going to do this video as two videos. There's going to be a long version that has a lot of clips in it, and there's going to be a short version that has maybe only one or two clips in it. And I do that because some of you want short videos and some of you want long videos. So I'm going to attempt to do that. So this is the beginning of the third debate, and here Sam sort of sets the stage, and I think he pretty much gets this right. And as we develop this, we'll see where the two really differ. And
Jordan, and I should say that though much of our conversation together will often sound like we're debating, we'll definitely, none of us are in the habit of pulling our punches. There's an immense amount of goodwill here, and it's true on stage, it's true off stage, and we're all trying to refine our beliefs together in conversation. So none of us view this as a debate, though we might stridently disagree about one thing or another. So what Jordan, I think, disagrees with me about, I think he's worried that we clearly have a common project. We're both concerned to understand how to live lives worth living.
okay, so there's their common project. They're both concerned to live lives worth living. Now, you'll notice that's, how do you measure that? How do you measure a life worth living? And Sam has an idea that somehow rationality as is a guide to well-being, and rational agents can determine and guide their lives towards well-being. For Peterson, the image is a bit more complex.
How can we do this individually? And how can we build societies that safeguard this project for millions of people attempting to do this in their diverse ways? And so many questions immediately come online when you try to do that. But what is the relationship between facts and values, for instance, or science and spiritual experience, or ethical lives? And we have, as for the moment, differing answers to those questions. Jordan is...
Okay, and then he goes from there. But that's where I wanted to begin. So how can we make life worth living, and how can we develop systems and structures and societies where as many people as possible can live lives worth living, or we might say meaningful lives? Now, of course, Jordan's story, if you go back to Maps of Meaning, the first lecture, the 2017 was the last one that he did, his story begins with trauma and fascination for totalitarian regimes. He grew up in the Cold War, and he wanted to answer the question why these two civilizations would put the entire life as we know it in the entire world at risk of nuclear annihilation over ideological differences. Why would the Cold War, a difference of ideology, risk bringing the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation? And he was also fascinated by, so again, having life be worth living, these different regimes, Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, Democratic West. We can throw in the Islamic countries, although the rise of these neo-Islamic countries is quite a bit newer, because of course the old Ottoman Empire falls at the end of the First World War, and there's a reformulation, and of course later in the 20th century, a new arrangement for the ideas of how an Islamic country, what an Islamic country would be. But all of those countries, all of those systems are asking questions about how can we as individuals, as communities, live lives worth living. And so Peterson very much dug into those ideas and worked through them, and that of course is his work, Maps of Meaning. How did totalitarian governments thrive in the 20th century and then fall, and why? And of course his eyes are from a young man growing up in Farview, Alberta. I think it's Farview or Fairview, I don't remember. Alberta. And his father, his parents are educators. He gets involved as a young man in politics very quickly. His undergrad is political science, and he very quickly turns to psychology. Now, here's the thing about human beings. Human beings are not simply the product of evolution. And I've often used the example of this alligator named Goliath that is in a gator farm in southern Florida. I remember visiting there with my children, and I'd see all of these gators just sitting in these pools, and I basically asked the guy there, don't they get bored? Because I know, if you have a dog, I had Rottweilers at the time, those dogs get bored. They can get destructive because they got to chew. They're busy. And the guy says, no, they're pretty dumb. As long as you throw chicken at them, they'll sit there in this warm water and eat and grow and multiply. We human beings are not like that. And I think as Brett Weinstein said with his conversation with Alistair McGrath that I've played a number of times, and I'll play it in the clip video. I won't play it in the non-clip video. Human beings are heirs of two lines of inherited information. There's the genetic information that is carried via the DNA, and then there's the cultural information. And Brett, I think, says quite aptly and correctly that for human beings, those two strands are necessary to produce a human being. And as Brett says, they're at the far end of a continuum.
Well, let's get into some of the meat of what we're talking about tonight. I wonder if you could maybe give us a brief and hopefully layperson-friendly account of how you imagine religious belief arose in a strictly evolutionary sort of paradigm. Brett.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is what we don't tend to understand when we take a strict classic Darwinian perspective about humans is that human beings are the far end of a continuum. Most creatures have essentially one mode of inheritance, and it is genetic. We have a second mode, and it is cultural. And we are not completely alone. All of the other mammals have a cultural mode, and almost all of the birds have it, but that's a tiny fraction of the biota.
And the amount of culture is also pretty tiny as compared to human beings.
But for those creatures that do have this second mode, what you have is a locale where information can be stored in a non-genetic form, and it can be acted upon by the very same kinds of Darwinian forces that shape genes.
And that locale in which the non-genetic information is stored is actually stored within the culture of the community of these creatures. It's in their minds. It's in the thought world. Okay? And it's inhabited in the practices of the community. In other words, it's not stored. You can't put it under a microscope necessarily like you can when you look at DNA and say, well, here are the four letters over and over and over in this long stream. It is stored in a sense in history. That's where the culture is stored.
So in one sense, Dawkins introduced this idea with the concept of memes. It became clear in my conversation with him in October, though, that he didn't take the concept of memes very seriously. That
And Peterson basically makes the same argument.
he thought that it was loosely analogous to the genetic Darwinian process, but it didn't have important consequences. What I would argue to you is that we humans have offloaded a large fraction of the adaptive landscape to what I would call the software layer.
Okay, now that's a really interesting way to phrase it. We've offloaded it. Now, we might ask Sam Harris, have we done that rationally? No, we haven't done it consciously. Thousands of years ago, there weren't a group of people that have decided well, we're going to offload part of our information into culture, and this is going to have biological consequences. For example, I think it was Jordan Peterson that made the observation that if you look at a chimpanzee, for example, they have these big round bellies. Well, why do they have these huge round bellies? They have these huge round bellies because they have way more intestine than we do. Well, why do chimpanzees have way more intestine than we do? They need to have all that intestine so they can digest food like leaves, and it just takes them forever to digest it. Well, what happened with human beings? Human beings outsourced a bunch of our digestion with cooking and fire making. And that has, in fact, changed our physiology as a species and distinguished us from the chimpanzees. Okay? And this is one example of offloading. It's very hard to be a human being and not be able to make fire and cook. It's very hard to be a human being and not be radically dependent on tool making. It's very hard to be a human being, and as many have noted, many animals, they're born and they're ready to go right away. Human beings have this incredible amount of time that they are dependent on their parents for protection, for sustenance, so on and so forth. All of this gets offloaded from the hardware layer into the software layer. It's sort of like Samsung versus Google and their cameras. And those of you who aren't phone nerds, Samsung is always trying to do things in hardware that Google tries to do in software, or human beings are really software dependent.
Right? Our genomes do not create a functional creature. We are utterly helpless at birth, and our very long childhoods are a time period in which one can discover and basically self-program the software necessary for life. Now, what we do during that time is we largely pick up the wisdom of our immediate ancestors who we meet, and then we augment it with things that we discover that they didn't know, which is a very small fraction of what we come to understand. So,
now, most of this process is not conscious, and therefore not really subject to the kind of rationality that Sam Harris wants to point to. Now Sam will say that, well, we weren't this, but now we're conscious of it. The difficulty that you have with this, if, for example, you look at someone who is like a parent, the household in which you were raised and the culture in which you were raised was the first draft of your parenting skills. And then as you begin to parent, you might read a book, you might watch other parents, you might have tried some things and it didn't work. You might have done some reflection on the parenting that you received as a child and wanted to do things differently, on and on and on and on. But we all receive a tremendous amount of information that is encoded and embedded in the culture. In fact, I would argue that there is so much information there that you don't have time in your child's life. We'll use the example of parenting. You don't have time in your child's life to sit there and actually decode and write down everything, all of the information that's in there, that's patterned out in action. All right, you wouldn't have enough time to actually parent if you did that. It's all built into you, and you don't know it. And this is where Vervaeke's realization comes in, relevance realization, because what happens as you're tinkering with your parenting skills, or maybe you watched your parents' marriage and you're tinkering with your marriage skills, or maybe you watched your parents in terms of their career track, as you're tinkering with all these, you're doing relevance realization to say, here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem, I'm going to address it. But there's far too much information that is built into, that you have inherited, that you have absorbed and encoded as an unconscious first draft about how to live your life. Then you will have time to actually go through it. And in fact, if you go into therapy or pastoral counseling or something like this, what actually happens is you begin to pull out little strands of it and use a little bit of rationality on it. But the amount of information from the total that you possess and have absorbed and have built in that you can actually pull out and manipulate rationally is tiny, tiny, tiny. Because no human being, quite frankly, has ever or probably will ever be able to fully exhaust the amount of information that you have absorbed just within the first 6 years of your life. Partly because, for the most part, our tools for noting and exploring these, you look at again at Vervaeke's 4 Ps, much of them we would try to put in as propositional. There's a ton that's perspectival and participatory, and then also the acting. I can never remember all four. I'm gonna have to write them down and put my procedural. There it is. The procedural that doesn't lend itself to putting down into words. All right. So all of this information is in us, and we couldn't even write it out accurately if we wanted to, mostly because the process of doing so would be so pointless and futile that it would take an enormous amount of time and we wouldn't realize it. But it's all built into us.
If you take that paradigm, what you'll realize is that we get handed a belief system that individuals whose belief system is...
And not just a belief system, our entire way of acting and behaving, we not only get it handed to us, we absorb it, whether or not anybody's actually trying to hand it to us. And again, if you go into therapy or counseling, you know this, because that's the stuff you're working on.
As a better match for the world have advantages. People whose belief systems are a poorer match for the world have disadvantages. And over time, those belief systems, the narratives that we hand off, will be refined by this process.
And now, even though when he says a better match for the world, that's a really apt, and I keep playing this clip, because in my opinion, this is the best clip I have to talk about this dynamic. But fit for the world, match for the world, I mean, again, that gets back into Vervaekean fittedness. This match for the world is so immense. It's the relevance realization that we're looking to, that trying to map at that point. So even the tiny little mapping we're trying to do here is such a minuscule part of the world.
And so this is so certain once you accept that we have these cultural traits and that better ones will inherently be passed on more often than worse ones. It is so certain that effectively we are talking about a tautology. When we talk about, for example, the narratives that go along with the life of Jesus, how is it possible that those narratives were not shaped by the fact that some versions of the story were more compelling, some versions of the story led to alterations in behavior that led populations to outcompete their rivals? These things effectively have to be true. And so therein lies the explanation for all of the belief systems that we find different populations having on Earth. They are not inherently in competition with each other. They are adaptations to different times and different places, different obstacles. Sometimes a belief system replaces another. Sometimes we have a process analogous to speciation, where you'll get, a division, for example, between Catholics and Protestants.
And even when we're talking belief systems, that amount of propositional belief system that we can actually articulate is such a tiny fraction of the believing life that is lived. And this is part of the reason why you say, look at someone who, let's say, goes to a very conservative church and another person who is completely atheist, and they're both living next to each other. There'll be so much overlap in terms of how they're living, but yet there'll be other aspects which will be so different. And I mean, this is the amount of information that is at play in something like this is just so overwhelmingly expansive. Combinatorial explosion. Okay, another, Vervaeke word. It's just astounding that the fact that we can track this is just amazing. But again, now this is going to get into the Harris thing. What are the kinds of tools we use to track this? What are the kinds of languages what kind of language that we use? What the kind of stories? We need a form of information encoding that is both, we have this with data. It has enormous powers of compression, and it's also scalable. And that's, again, where Jordan Peterson's low resolution, high resolution language, which I learned that was one of the first things I learned listening to him, is really helpful, because what this does is it all gets captured into enormously compressed. Well, what is enormously compressed life? It's often ritual and liturgy and saying, even make America great. That's enormous compression for a particular thing. Or you can keep your doctor, or, a stitch in time saves nine. I mean, we have lots of these things, but this is my body. There's just millions of it, and we get this enormous compression. And again, there's so much information. It's all packed in so tightly. We need tools that have been developed for thousands of years in order to function communally with respect to each other and the world, with as much capacity and power that we are able to possess today.
Where both continue on, adapted to slightly different parameters. And so I was
going to say, I'll be interested in Alice's response in a moment, but what you've described there, in a sense, is this idea that religious beliefs, like perhaps all beliefs of one kind or another, we receive them because of their value that has been handed down by the evolutionary process, this adaptive sort of, if you like, benefit that it confers on the people who hold it together, perhaps in a community. But in that sense, it doesn't have much to say as to whether those beliefs are true in a...
And again, you're going to have to figure out what do you mean by true.
Kind of objective way. It's more about their usefulness in that way.
Well, I would argue that this is not really an obstacle, that in a sense, so what I've defined as something I call metaphorical truth. A metaphorical truth is a belief that if one acts according to the idea that it is true, one outcompetes somebody who will act according to the fact that it is false.
And now what Jonathan Peugeot, and he's dead on right, all of our articulations of truth are metaphorical. And again, Brett just talked about this in one of his recent question and answers, whether you're using this religious community that had this idea of the spirits in the water when the water goes out, and this is how the whole community saved, did not perish in the Boxing Day tsunami, is an articulation of plate tectonics and ocean geography any less metaphorical than the story of the spirits in the waters? That's the question. And Peugeot has said, he wants to talk to Brett about this, and I want to see that conversation, because Peugeot is right, because they're both metaphorical truths, and they're both attempts at approximating dynamics. And the fact that even though many of the people who died in that had available to them the metaphorical truth of plate tectonics, it was the deployment this is very much what Jordan Peterson gets into his talk with Sam Harris. It was actually the functional deployment of the spirits in the waters that functioned better to save that tribe than what we say, oh, the literal truth of plate tectonics. What is literal about me moving this air out of my mouth as that corresponds to sliding plates under the ocean that causes an earthquake and a tsunami and wipes out a whole bunch of people? It's both ideas. They're both words. Now you might say, well, this plate tectonic system is a better system. Better at what? Well, it's a more scalable system in that you can have volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis and prediction and measurement, and you'd say, yeah, that's a better system. But in terms of this little tribe, the deployment of the story of the spirit and the waters was a better system for saving all the lives of the people and the Boxing Day tsunami. So which system is better? It depends by what you mean by better. So I know already the frustration I have with having the short version and the long version of the video is because I thought the commentary that I just made on this video that I've looked at I don't know how many times was really good commentary. So if you want to see it, you have to actually watch both videos. But anyway, the point here is that human beings have two tracks. And just to summarize some of the points I made on the commentary section, which if you're watching the shorter video, you don't see, is what happens with human beings is that we have to inherit so much information, more information than we are consciously aware of. But we inherit so much information, and that information has to be compressed into enormously tight cultural bundles, only a tiny fraction of which we have the time in our lives to be conscious of. But so much of it is encoded within us. And my example of that is between the age of your first draft of parenting is the parenting you received, but you don't know it. And if you were to sit down, let's say you're having problems parenting, and you go down and you sit down with a therapist, and the therapist says, okay, write down everything you know about parenting. And maybe you could spend an hour doing it. The therapist would say, that's nothing like everything you know. Keep going back. And let's say you spent days and weeks working on everything you knew about parenting. You'd go back and you continue to do a therapy, and what you would discover is that you continue to realize things you knew that you didn't know you knew. Because and all of this is built in, and so much of it, Sam Harris's rationality wants to imagine that we can set this out propositionally and then we can manipulate it, but so much of the information is encoded in action and behaviors, and it's processed by intuition and feeling that there's far more information there than we can possibly have time in our instantaneous little lives to process. So your 2-year-old throws a temper tantrum, and then you think, okay, what you do is you react to it. And you don't know why you react to it. But all of the stuff that is built into that reaction has been encoded to you from a myriad of information that you have effortlessly absorbed that you don't even know you have. And that's what a human being is. Okay? And if you want the long version of that, see the other. Now, what happens, however, with human beings is that these two streams are tightly intertwined. They are not discrete. We keep talking nature and nurture, but we have absolutely no idea in real life how they're separated. And again, something like marriage or parenting, something where, okay, your child throws a temper tantrum and you have an emotional reaction to this. And then you have an instinctive response that before you consciously or rationally have time to respond to your temper tantrum, boom, you do something. Tim Keller has this great story about when one of his children was young. They were at a park in New York City, and the kid was climbing up the slide, and he was down at the other end waiting to receive the kid, and the kid starts falling off the ladder of the slide, and Tim Keller says, before I knew it, I was around the slide and I caught the kid. And his wife who was there was like looking at him like, how did you do that? Tim Keller's not, he'll tell you himself, he's not an athletic guy, he's a bookworm. But people have these experiences where it's like, it was coded into me. And I didn't know how. Now, is that biology or is that culture? And you can't differentiate or distinguish these two things. So these two streams are not discrete. And over huge expanses of time, they have intersected and evolved. The values are selected for in the mating process. Because multiple values compete, they lay themselves out in hierarchies, and these get passed on down via agentic, this is another word I picked up from the Weinstein brothers, agentic sexual inheritance. So I'm going to play a clip from one of the Peterson-Sam Harris debates here.
I realized from our conversation in Dublin some of what your concerns are about what Jordan has been saying and what he is saying, and I share some of the concern. I said to you then that I used the analogy of what our friend Eric Weinstein recently described to me as Jesus smuggling, that it was a consequence of a discussion about biologists. What do you do if you're discussing design, intelligent design? You can be okay as long as your own bandwidth on the issue, as long as your own depth of knowledge on the issue is very considerable. You can be okay discussing that biology with somebody, even a fundamentalist Christian, so long as you can follow every step of the way. But the fear will always be that the moment you're not looking, they're going to smuggle Jesus in.
Now, here's an observation on the Jesus smuggling thing. Would we smuggle in Marx? Why is Jesus, we imagine, a fit figure to smuggle into so many different conversations? Think about that.
Or they'll wait till the moment that you're not comfortable anymore with the argument, the bit when you're at the very end of your cognitive ability, and then they'll, trust me.
There's Jesus. Yeah.
There's Jesus. And one of the things I realized from Dublin was, although I think you may not think that Jordan himself is going to try Jesus smuggling on you, you fear that somewhere down the line from what he's saying, somebody else will do that trick.
Yeah, it's worse than that. I actually know the people who are clapping are doing that. I hear from those people on a daily basis, right? So
I've never written Sam Harris a note of any way, shape, or form. Just have you know that.
The segment of Jordan's audience that is very happy to be told they can stay on the riverbank of their traditional Christianity for the most part, and they don't have to get into the stream of totally modern, rigorous, rational thinking about everything from first principles, right? That there's some...
Oh, go back and look at my conversation about information and everything that is encoded to us. From first principles, really? Do you really think that's how human beings work? Do you really think human beings can work? How much life would you need to actually articulate the first principles and all the whole chain up rationally? You don't have enough life, and you'd never choose to do it because it's not worth your time, because your system has already embedded it and encoded it, and it might not be perfect, and sometimes it might be really screwed up, and you might need a lot of therapy or a lot of counseling or an intervention, but the process that is already encoded in you is so thoroughly efficient that you would never bother working from first principles. That is a fiction that makes Jesus smuggling look rational.
Something that the Iron Age scribes got right, and it's right for all time.
I really have to do a video just on how Sam Harris talks about the Bible, and I'll probably touch on that in this video, but it is so simply wrong.
Those are the applause I'm hearing. And however consciously or not, Jordan is telling them it's okay to stick right there with a shard of the cross.
He's religious adjacent. How dare he?
Okay, well, in Dublin, I actually tried a little conscious Jesus smuggling on Sam to see how that would go in a discussion we had about the central archetype of superheroes, but I'm going to try something a little different tonight. I'm going to try a little direct God smuggling. We won't bother with Jesus. Let's go right to God. Why not? So one of the things I've really tried to do when I've been analyzing religious texts is to take them seriously, in the sense that I don't presume that I understand them. And I presume that they're a mystery of sorts. And at least the Bible, for example, is a mystery because we don't really understand the processes by which it was constructed, and we don't understand the processes by which we all agreed collectively over several thousand years to organize the book the way it is organized.
And this is what Jordan is going through is exactly what's wrong with Sam's addressing the Bible, because Sam keeps saying, well, religious people believe that God dictated this book. Well, okay. Some religious people believe that for some books. Not all religious people, and not this Christian. And go back over my videos when I talk about inspiration. And in fact, as we get later into this video and we talk about what we mean by this word God, we don't know the process by which the Bible came to us. It wasn't, at some point, individual people wrote different things, but that book was edited and formed and shaped, and the stories cut, and not unlike the process that we see happening to other canons such as Star Trek and Star Wars, but now over thousands and hundreds and thousands of years, and molded and shaped and worked by communities and all of that, this fiction that Sam has that Christians are just, oh, here I read this book that I believe God said it, I believe it, that settles it. And I've lived among Christians that say that, and when I watch how they act, they're still acting from all of this other encoded information that they have received from their parents that Brett Weinstein was just talking about. Okay, so real people don't actually work that way. Even when they think they're working that way, they don't. They just don't.
Or to edit it the way that it's edited, and to keep what's in it, and to discard what's not in it.
And so Peterson's alluding then to this process. And this process isn't just by one person. And this process isn't even just by a committee. That this process is a far more organic, mysterious, communal process that, well, a little bit later when we understand what Jordan Peterson says, God, what we're using that word to refer to, well, yeah, that process comes from God, just like trees come from God.
Why it's lasted and why it's had such a huge impact.
I don't want to derail you, but yeah. We do understand that the first part of the process all too well. We know that there was a...
Do we, Sam? Please tell me about this process. Please tell me how... Let's just stick to the Old Testament. Please tell me how that book came about, because I've watched scholars debate this stuff, and you know what? It's still debating, but I'll tell you one thing. Nobody imagines that the process was simple. Let's just take one book. Let's just take the book of Job. Explain to me where the book of Job comes from, and what the status of the book of Job is, and how the book of Job has been used.
Political and all too human process of voting certain texts in for inclusion, and some were...
Sam Harris is just wrong. The facts, Sam, you like facts? Your facts are simply wrong. Sure, you can point to some church father councils where they're working on the canon, but even that process of New Testament canon is so much messier and organic than you're describing.
Were in for centuries and then got jettisoned, and
sure.
And Revelation came in far later than... I mean, there were whole generations of Christians.
I mean, he sounds like a guy who knows, one or two items, and which I've done plenty too, I'm sure, and just this is the tiny little bit I know about, the status of the book of Revelation. You know what? Take any commentary on the book of Revelation. Here, I've got my commentaries right here. Open up. Let's take my favorite commentary, Beale's commentary, and open up the beginning of this book, and you will find dozens of pages on authorship, canonicity, and Sam Harris just puts it right down to a tiny little thing. It's like, Sam...
who lived and died under the banner of the Bible,
Yes.
and it was a different Bible at the time.
Of
They
course,
had the wrong
of course.
Bible. So
well, but it's the same. It's the same issue that we really don't understand. Fair enough, Sam. And I'm not saying that political, etc., considerations didn't enter into it. I'm sure all.
And Peterson is right. Political considerations entered it. Lots of considerations entered it, and not centrally by necessarily one person.
Human considerations entered into it, but there was some collective process of winnowing, and you can attempt to reduce that to economic or political causes, which is generally what secular assessors like Freud and Marx both did, and with a fair degree of success, I might add. But there's still some mysterious assessment of what it is that will be remembered that entered into it. But it's a separate point to some degree. I'm just saying that my point of departure when looking at these texts is one of an essential radical ignorance. I don't assume that I understand the mechanisms by which they were generated or edited or collected or kept or remembered, or why they had the impact they had. Now,
and continue to have the impact they have. I mean, Peterson is dead on right on this point.
I've been thinking a lot about the idea of, let's say, God the Father, because that's a very common archetypal representation of God the Father. So I'm going to tell you an experience that I had that I've never really told any audience about. I had a vision at one point and the vision had to do with a dialogue that I was having with my father. And you have a father, right? And when you're a little kid, you act out your father when you pretend to be a father. And what you
Now again, this gets back into these two streams that Brett Weinstein is talking about.
doing when you're acting out your father isn't imitating your father, because you don't duplicate precisely the actions that your father ever took in his life. What you do is you watch your father across multiple contexts, and you abstract out something like a spirit of the father. And then when you're a child, you implement that spirit of the father in your.
And as a child, you don't even know what you're doing it, but you're doing it. That much has been encoded, that much information. And psychologists will sit and they'll talk about and they'll have theories about this, but we don't know. And even those theories are just a tiny subfraction of all of the things that we're doing.
Play, and you come to embody that deeply. So the notion is that people can abstract out something like a spirit of the father, and that's part of our mimetic tendency, which is a very powerful human cognitive tendency. And in this vision, I first started to talk with my father, and I would say more with the spirit of my father, because he wasn't actually there.
I just noted he's got a lobster tie on, so love the lobster tie.
And I would say it was the wisest part of him. And then that sort of transformed into a discussion that I had with a series of ancestral spirits. And then that transformed itself into a vision of God himself, with whom I had a conversation.
Okay, now he's having a conversation with God. Now, it's important to keep in mind, because that's in terms of my God number one, God number two, that's God number two. You're having a conversation. And
this was a visionary experience. And then that all went away, and I spent months and months thinking about it. And I thought, so you guys can tell me what you think about this. And this sort of stretches my cognitive ability to its utmost limit to contemplate such things. But here's a biological argument. I already made the case that a child can extract out the spirit of the father and embody it, and that's necessary insofar as you're going to be a father and a wise one.
And every child does it without even knowing it. And we do not have enough time to describe all of the information that is packed into that, especially propositionally.
We can also extract out the spirit of the father over much longer periods of time, because my father was a father because he imitated his father, who imitated his father, who imitated his father, as far back in time as you can go. And there's a cumulative development of the spirit of the father across time. Now, then the question might be, does this spirit of the father have any reality other than the metaphorical? And I would say, damn right it has a reality, and I can describe a biological reality, and I don't know what this says about any background metaphysics, but...
So not only does it have a cultural reality, now again, it's Brett, we offloads this stuff up to the culture, but what happens is the two streams over time, these two streams get intermingled, and there's no pulling them apart. Just like why are our bellies so flat and why is a chimp so barrel-like? That's just one tiny little low resolution difference. But all of this is built into this, and so nicely over time this gets built into it, generation after generation after generation after generation, culturally and biologically, one joint thing.
Here's a hypothesis. We know that human beings separated from chimpanzees over the course of the last 7 million years, at least in large part because of human female sexual selectivity. So it was the spirit of femininity collectively that helped elevate us to the degree that we have been elevated above our chimpanzee co-ancestor. But here's something interesting to contemplate. What is it precisely that makes men desirable to women? And so I have a bit of a hypothesis about that. So here's what men do. They get together in productive groups, and they orient themselves toward a certain task. And they produce a hierarchy around that task, because whenever you implement a task, you produce a hierarchy. And they vote up the most competent men to the top of the hierarchy, and then the women select the competent men from the top of the hierarchy.
Now, pay attention to the word competence here, because we're going to come all the way back to that when we talk about Roger Scruton, because that's key for Peterson in terms of his political and social critique, because it's going to be competence versus tyranny. But competence, you see, that's a great word. What does it mean? So, the competent parent. Some people are competent parents because they had competent parents, and they had a good first draft of parenting that they were able to perfect and refine, and then they became parents, and then their children picked up that first draft of parenting, and on, or marriage, or woodworking, or business acumen, and then they go up the hierarchy and they meet, well, the women are looking for competence and the men are looking at beauty, and so up it goes. And you might say, well, why is it that all of the people who are making all of this money also look so beautiful? Well, lots of things are happening. Not always, but all of this stuff gets encoded and it gets built into not only us as individuals, not only us as families, but us as tribes and societies and the whole thing. And again, there's far more information here than any of us would have time or ability to mark down and externalize propositionally and to try to manipulate with kind of the rational process that Sam Harris is trying to promote.
The vote that determines who the competent men are that are more likely to reproduce is a consequence of male evaluation of men, and that's occurred over millennia. And so there's a spirit of the father that's embedded in the patriarchal hierarchy that acts as the primary selection mechanism that offers men up to women and plays a cardinal role in human evolution. And it looks like we've personified that spirit of the father in our religious imagery. And that's how it looks to me. But then there's something that's even more mysterious and deep about that that's worth considering, is that apparently the entire course of evolutionary history has conspired to produce human beings. And we could argue that it could have been different, but it certainly hasn't been different. And that means that selective spirit of the father has been part of the process that's generated our very being. And it's certainly possible that collective spirit of the father reflects something metaphysically fundamental about the structure of reality itself.
Wait, I was with you up until the last sentence, yes. Well, insofar as I agree with virtually all of that, I should say that none of that should give comfort to people who want to hold on to this notion that certain of our books might have been revealed by the creator of the universe.
And again, he goes back to this simplistic narrative. Now again, even in this narrative, which is simplistic and not the kind of narrative that many Christians actually embrace, even that narrative has built within it the kind of power that, going back to the Boxing Day tsunami, saved that group of people. So even an overly simplistic narrative, which I myself don't embrace as such, the way Sam Harris lays it out, even I would argue that narrative is superior to what he's trying to do. So these streams get crossed and they get built in, and there's no, the streams are not discrete, and there's no way to pull this apart. Now, what this produces in us is this a priori structure. And if you look at especially the two Vancouver talks where Brett Weinstein was there, and it comes up in the other ones too, what Peterson keeps trying to address is that Sam Harris imagines we can operate in the world sort of pulling everything out as propositional truths, rationally manipulating them. Well, let's even give actions and behaviors, rationally manipulating these actions and behaviors, and then simply changing them. And what Peterson says is that there's far too much information, and so what we actually have is a sorting mechanism. And the sorting mechanism, just because of the two strings, is built within us structurally, because what happens is you have the hardware and the software, and it becomes so much software, the software begins to rebuild the hardware, and back and forth and back and forth. Again, that's why we don't have the barrel chest of the chimpanzee, because the software of culture and cooking reprogrammed the hardware. So now we have less intestine than a chimpanzee, and we don't have the enzymes that break down the leaves and things that the chimpanzees and the cows are eating. And instead we outsource that to cooking. The structures are so built within us, and that's just digestion. We're not even talking the unbelievable mental capacity that we possess, because and if you read I was reading this interesting book about comparing human intelligence to chimps, and it was kind of like, well, how much smarter are we really than chimps? It's all the software, it's all the communal processing, it's that capacity built in with, I forget, at one point Peterson talks about how many of our receptors are inhibitors, which means that the crazy things about chimps is they have no impulse control. And I'll tell you, in terms as I work with addicts and homeless people and just there's very successful people in society, impulse control is a huge problem with us, okay? With human beings. And, we're impulsive. And sometimes being impulsive pays off. Often being impulsive really is a problem. And so impulse control is a huge thing. Be able to weigh and measure. In fact, impulse control is behind this entire salvific narrative of rationality that Sam Harris wants to put forward, because impulse control means weighting and testing my intuitions and using data. So the heart of the Vancouver One talk was, because these structures are so within us, we are blind to them and their impact. They are cultural, psychological, and biological. And the longest running self-conscious conversation, individual and communal, attempts to hack these, and they're fundamentally religious. That is, in fact, the great compression schemes that take this enormous world and boil it down into stories and systems that we can actually work on. And you'll find Jordan Peterson, both when he's talking to the Ayn Rand people in that one conversation with Dave Rubin and other places, noting that when he's working with people who are deeply troubled by, let's say, post-traumatic stress, and I had this talking to Sevilla King when we talked about this time. People can't change until they get down to the theological level. Why? Because the theological is the level at which the compression schemes get so tight that there's so much information that's boiled down to them. And it's at that level that we can actually, the data sets are small enough that we can actually work on them, but they're tied all the way out. And I would say philosophy is a sort of a a similar thing like that. All right. Now, I think I have a clip that I want to play with this one too.
Why don't we each take 3 minutes to sum up? So
now this is a no, this isn't.
I think we are there. We are at the end of time. So why don't you each take 3 minutes, sum up, and then we'll call it good.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, what I want you to hear here is that Peterson sums up precisely what his project was. And I don't think Sam sees it.
Sure. Okay. Sam went last. You want to go first here?
Okay. So there's lots of things about which Sam and I agree, but the devil's in the details, of course. I'm very sympathetic to his claim that we need to ground our ethical systems in something solid and demonstrable. My problem is I'm not sure how to do that. I don't believe that you can derive a value structure from your experience of the observable facts.
See, here's the thing that Peterson has said is, then we're going to get into this a little bit deeper. Value, in this long history of the two streams being put together, value structures have infiltrated the biology. Okay? So this has all been built in here with this a priori structure that we use to filter the world. One of the values, I've used this illustration before, if I walk into my office, there's a Bengal tiger, I close the door. I close the door without even thinking of it. That value of self-preservation has been built into the hardware at a very deep layer. Okay? And so the fact value, this continues to be a struggle, as Sam noted at the introductory thing, but there's this structure that has been built into it. And how do we talk about the context, the building in, the structure? What name would we give that?
There's too many facts. You need a structure to interpret them, and there isn't very much of you. And
when he says there isn't very much of you, there isn't enough time in a normal biological life to be able to process this, so we inherit. It is not the case that before we are allowed to have children, we go and we sit down and someone puts us for years telling us how to raise a child. You have a child, you don't know how to raise the child. What is your first draft? It's how you were raised, for better or for worse. Okay? But that's all built into us.
Part of the way that that's addressed neurologically is that you have an inbuilt structure. It's deep. It's partly biological. It's partly an emergent consequence of your socialization.
Cultural.
And you view the world of facts through that structure. And it's a structure of value. Now, that structure of value...
See, the evaluating has been built into the Old Testament calls us a nephesh, a soul and body. Makes the man out of the dust of the earth and breathes into him. There's a way of conceptualizing what we are.
May be derived from the world of facts over the evolutionary time frame, but it's not derived from the world of facts over the time frame that you inhabit, and it can't be.
You wouldn't have enough time to sit down. You couldn't imagine if you had to learn how to parent the way you tried to learn if you grew up in America in a monolinguistic culture, the way you tried to learn Spanish. Imagine what a catastrophe that would be for children. Why was it so simple and effortless that you picked up the primary language or languages which you were exposed to at a very young age? That's us.
So the problem I have with our discussion so far isn't really any of Sam's fundamental ethical claims, because I do believe there's a distinction between the hellish life and the heavenly life, say, the life that everyone would agree was absolutely not worth living, and the life we could imagine as good. And I do believe that we should be moving from one to the other. The question is exactly how is it that we make the decisions that will guide us along that way? And I don't believe we can make them without that a priori structure. In fact, I think the evidence is absolutely overwhelming that we can't, and I mean also the scientific evidence. And I would like to go further into the devil that's in those details. And so that's my...
And Sam's not going to give you that opportunity, because Sam just keeps going back to his allergic reaction. So at the end of Vancouver 1, Peterson says, and if you go back to my earlier commentary, Peterson keeps trying to say, Sam, there's this a priori structure that's been built into us. It's deeply within us. It's analogous to the fact that, I'm making this, not Peterson, you could learn a language or multiple languages growing up effortlessly. And in a sense, again, my words, not Jordan's, what Sam's advocating is that the real path to mastery of this world is the kind of direct, rational approach of trying to learn a foreign language in high school or college and never actually going to the country and being immersed in it. We're going to learn it rationally. Here's the grammar, here are the nouns, here are the verbs, make some vocab cards. Is that really the best way to learn a language? It isn't. Sam Harris comes along and he's just dismissive. Poor Jordan never really gets, I don't think, a competent conversation partner in this, because Sam just keeps hitting his allergic reaction. It's sort of like if you were married to someone that had been traumatized as a child about dogs. You could never go anywhere where there was a mention of a dog, because every time a dog would come around, the show is over because there's a dog. There's a dog. There's a dog. And it's like, well, can we go to Yosemite? There might be a dog if we go on vacation. Can we go to this hotel? Do they allow dogs? I mean, that's what trying to have a conversation with Sam Harris is like with these things. Because any mention of religion or a holy book or anything like this, I mean, Sam is like someone who's been bit by a dog. And anytime you get near a dog, the difficulty is that it's almost impossible to go around and have a dog-free life or a child-free life. So he's dismissive, and in my view, he's astoundingly naive about human beings. He's like the serial divorcee not being able to figure out why he or she has such bad luck finding a soulmate. The same issues keep cropping up in these relationships. Wonder where they come from. I think I have another video clip that demonstrates this. Yep.
Seems to me, though, like, and this may be my own idiosyncratic reading of the domain, but when I look at something like I've often considered a cathedral dome, let's say, and there are very, very old cathedral domes that have an image of Christ put up against the dome, right? So as creator of the cosmos, okay? And I'm trying to look at that from a psychological and even a biological perspective. And what I see is the elevation of a particular image that represents an ideal. And so the Christ that's represented on the dome of a cathedral is something that's projected up into celestial space. So it's an ideal to which you are supposed to be subordinate, or that you're supposed to embody. And the ideal is the ideal of the Logos, technically speaking. The Logos, the Word made flesh, which is not only the Word, free speech for lack of a better term, but also the embodiment of that, elevated to the highest principle. And that is given status as the creator of the universe. And the reason for that, in part, and this is written into the Judeo-Christian doctrine right from line 1, is the idea that it's through the discourse that you value so much that we actually engender the world as such. And that is a divine principle. And it's also, in my reading, the divine image of God that men and women are made in. And so what I see in that...
Okay, now notice, if you're following the argument we've made here, that we've got this a priori structure, we've got this long history of the genetic and the culture being made together to the effect that the software is shaping the hardware, and this is happening over long periods of time. What could we call this entire process? If we would imagine an agentic process, and if we had to represent it in a pictorial sort of way, what might we call it? We'd call it God.
Underlying metaphysic where you see superstition and fundamentalism, and look, fair enough, and it's not like I would ever argue that that's not a danger. I see the imagistic and dramatized representation of exactly the idea that you hold to be paramount above all else, which is your commitment to truth, expressed in speech.
Okay, well, so my concern, and this is where I started with you, is that you could...
We never get beyond where you start, Sam. Dog.
Give the same charitable reading of astrology, and you'd even be tempted to do it as we talk about astrology, as you showed at the outset. Now,
but I don't think why is it a charitable reading, Sam? Like,
well, no,
so how else would you explain the existence of something like a cathedral with that image? Like, what the hell were people doing when they built that?
I'm saying we could. It's by dint of mere historical contingency and questionable luck that...
Show me another world that doesn't have it. I mean, Sam's argument would have more force if, well, it's only these certain religious groups of people, maybe in Europe and Africa, but over in Asia, they weren't religious at all. Why is religion universal? I mean, the sample. He's like, well, it's just happenstance. Why is there no example of, I mean, if representing it via imagery, which is the compression, is such a happenstance thing, why can't you find anyone that didn't do it?
We're not living in a world where the cathedrals have stained glass windows with signs of the zodiac on them, right? We could be in that world.
Well, we are.
Watch Jonathan Peugeot's channel.
We're very close to being in that world.
We are in that world to some degree, because the astrological endeavor in the Judeo-Christian landscape expanded to incorporate Christianity. And there's an entire astrology of Christianity, including representation of Christ.
Read Psalm 8.
The sun. So we are in that.
The heavens declare the glory of God. What are they talking about? The sun and the moon and the stars. Read Genesis 1. Read Calvin Miller.
Run through. Yeah. So, but my point is that we recognize that the literal claims of astrology, the mechanism by which astrologers think it works, is intellectually bankrupt. Right, and if any significant mayhem were being caused by people's commitment to astrology,
and wasn't it rationality that does this? And here's the kicker. Again, the problem with Sam's argument is he has this subtraction story where, oh, well, we used to use astrology and that became astronomy, and well, first, yeah, it was pretty handy that watching the skies helped us learn how to plant. It was really handy that watching the skies helped us learn to navigate on the open ocean, and all of these things. Now we've put that behind us and no one would ever use it again. And the fact is, when people put away the more organized forms of religion that actually had a lot of rationality built into it, they go back to astrology. Sam's story would have a lot more coherence if it was the truth that when people left Christianity, they left astrology. But the truth is that when people leave Christianity, they go back to astrology. That's the truth, and that's the data. Read Clay Rutledge. I mean, there's overwhelming evidence that this is what people do. Watch Nathan Jacobs' work. It's all there. Sam wants to think that, oh, well, now I've given up Christianity, I'll believe in science. No. Suddenly you're back with tarot cards and all of this other stuff. Why do we keep going back there? maybe it's because, as Jordan wants to say, there's something about the way that we have to compress an enormously rich and full world, and the compression schemes all look something like the great traditions of religion and spirituality. It's the compression scheme that we try to get a mental handle on the world that is too big, and so it's religion is the JPEG of human complexity.
If we had presidents of the United States who couldn't get elected unless they paid lip service to a literal belief in astrology, if we had presidents who were consulting their astrologers to figure out when to meet with other world leaders,
Nancy Reagan.
right? This would be a problem that rational people would recognize. I mean, astrology can...
We had Marianne Williamson run for the Democratic nomination, Sam, and I would dare bet her ranks are full of post-Christian people, many of whom would have eaten up with a spoon his critique about Christianity and holy books and so on and so forth. This is how human beings are. So Jordan's trying to walk through this with Sam, and Sam just can't see it. And that's when we get to this clip that, again, I've played many times. Okay, so Jordan, what is God? Well, what if that entire world too big boiled down into an a priori structure where the software comes back around to the hardware, and it has an agentic force in our world, and the compression scheme JPEG basically religion is the JPEG of a too large world. All right, that's what I said on the clip. If you had a name for this, what would it be? Well, spirits and well, what if it was a totalizing thing? What if it were beyond just agents and actors and spirits of war and anger and sexual attraction and all of those things? How could you conceptualize it as an agent and arena together? Well, God number one as the arena, God number two as the agent, and Sam only sees God number two. I'm going to play this clip again.
Question. I mean,
yeah,
what do you mean by God?
Okay.
This comes up in Vancouver 1. And I don't know. See, my God number one and God number two, and what I observed in this thing, Jordan says it in some interesting ways. He sort of says it in his conversation with Bishop Barron. But what do you mean by God? Jordan basically says it's all of this built in, and religion and God, again, religion is the JPEG of the vast human world. It's how we boil it down. And again, Sam Harris believes that, well, once they become rational, no, because what happens to all these post-Christian people in North America? They start praying to universe and great spirit, and they boil it down the same way, because that's how we are built to encode a world too big and agentic and powerful. That's the way that we can actually process and thrive in this world. And that's why Sam and his idea of rationality, first of all, there's way too much information. We don't have anywhere near enough time. And so, Jordan, what do you mean by God? Well, here it is.
Well, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I mean by God. Okay.
We do have to get the question.
Maybe we're going to do this tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe this is where we start. Oh, God.
Everybody wants to know, what does Jordan mean by God? He's been explaining it the whole time.
Well, that was a pretty resounding no.
It seems like that constitutes an audience question, wouldn't you say?
All right, I tell you what. Let's do this, but let's be...
I'm going to read some things that I wrote because it's so complicated that I'm not sure that I can just spin it off the top of my head, and so you'll have to excuse me.
Now, again, why does the question here, which is easy to lose with all the little drama that goes in between, the question here is, Jordan, what do you mean by God? What is God?
So, and what I'm going to do is sort of paint a picture by highlighting different things. So now I already made one point here. I made the point that part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos is the notion that whatever God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. And that isn't all it does. It also confronts the chaos of being itself and generates habitable order. That's the metaphysical proposition. And that's best conceptualized as at least one element of God. And so I would think about it as a transcendent reality that's only observable across the longest of time frames, the longest of iterated time frames.
So again, all of this is God.
Your point. So here's some propositions, and they're complicated, and they need to be unpacked. So I'm just going to read them, and that'll have to do for the time being. So God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time, as the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now. So what that...
So again, well, why would we call that God? And again, Sam Harris has no idea what Jordan is talking about here, which will come clear in a few minutes. But what is Jordan saying? Well, God, well, we need it. The world is so huge. We need it small enough so that we can, in a sense, metaphorically get it in our hand or put it out in front of us, which is, again, why through just about every other religion except the Hebrews, they make a statue. But the Hebrews say, no, you can't do that. Well, why can't you do that? Because you're reducing the arena and the agent down into something within the arena, and that is offensive to God because it is a reduction of God into something that God has made. And the Apostle Paul brings up that exact same idea in Romans 1. Okay? That's why the Hebrews are so different, because they understand that it's all of this that we need, so God.
That means in some sense is that you have conceptions of reality built into your biological and metaphysical structure that are a consequence of processes of evolution that occurred over unbelievably vast expanses of time.
The streams have come together and the values have been built into us and have gotten all the way into our hardware.
Time, and that structure your perception of reality in ways that it wouldn't be structured if you only lived for the amount of time that you're going to live. And
a human being cannot just simply be born of biology.
That's also part of the problem of deriving values from facts, because you're evanescent and you can't derive the right values from the facts that portray themselves to you in your lifespan, which is why you have a biological structure that's like 3.5 billion years old. So God is that which eternally dies and is reborn in the pursuit of higher being and truth. That's a fundamental element of hero mythology. God is the highest value in the hierarchy of values. That's another way of looking at it. God is what calls and what responds in the eternal call to adventure. God is the voice of conscience.
Now notice that God is both in the hardware and the software here, okay?
God is the source of judgment and mercy and guilt. God is the future to which we make sacrifices.
And again, I don't know why that video isn't up, but so I did a conversation with him in April of 2018, and right after, and in my conversation with him, which is my most watched video on my channel, obviously, because Jordan Peterson is in it, and like all the videos of just me, there's about 1,000 people watching it. But that Easter video was very, very interesting, and I don't know if his publishers made him take it down or something because he read a chapter out of his book in there, but this idea of the future and God and the future, again, there's way too many elements in this that we can't just articulate it or have it out there, so we need a shorthand, and so we have this 3 letter word
and something akin to the transcendental repository of reputation. Here's a cool one if you're an evolutionary biologist. God is that which selects among men in the eternal hierarchy of men So, men arrange themselves into hierarchies, and then men rise in the hierarchy. And there's principles that are important that determine the probability of their rise, and those principles aren't tyrannical power. They're something like the ability to articulate truth and the ability to be competent and the ability to make appropriate moral judgments. And if you can do that in a given situation, then all the other men will vote you up the hierarchy, so to speak, and that will radically increase your reproductive fitness. And the operation of that process across long expanses of time looks to me like it's codified in something like the notion of God the Father. It's also the same thing that makes men attractive to women, because women peel off the top of the male hierarchy, and the question is what should be at the top of the hierarchy, and the answer right now is tyranny as part of the patriarchy, but the real answer is something more like the ability to use truthful speech in the service of, let's say, well-being. And so that's something that operates across tremendous expanses of time, and it plays a role in the selection for survival itself, which makes it a fundamental reality.
Remember, this is all what Jordan says God is. All right? That's easy to lose because he goes on for so long. But that's what he says God is. And now pay attention to Sam's action.
Jordan, if I can I just cut in here with one question.
Stop with that for now.
What... So I was not hearing in that list of attributes a God who could care if anyone masturbated. I was not hearing a God who...
Depends on what else is stopping you from doing, Sam.
Sorry, I missed that.
I said it depends on what else it's stopping you from doing.
Well, okay, so it's
yeah,
important to live.
Seriously.
It's important to do something other than masturbate.
Yes. Yes, which actually constitutes a problem for many people.
Which is harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
Because of well-being, because of rationality, because of impulse control.
I'm not hearing a God, a personal God who can possibly hear anyone's prayers, much less answer them, right? And I'm wondering,
again, dog.
What percentage of religious people who would say, "Oh yeah, I believe in God, and it's the most important thing in my life."
The trigger of the God number one, God number two stuff that I've been talking about for 2 years.
What percentage of those religious people do you think have in mind a God of the sort you just described?
I don't know, Sam. It's a good question, because when I go talk to people, when I talk to people online and use exactly this terminology, millions of people listen. So it's not so obvious what percentage of people see it this way. It may be that they have the intuitions, but they haven't been articulated well.
I mean, this is the problem. This is what worries me about this.
And then he goes into ghosts and stuff. And again, Sam doesn't understand Jordan in this stuff at all. So this is where Jordan basically says you've got God is all of these things built into us. And Sam hears that and says, what about the anti-masturbation? And Brett smiles because Brett understands Jordan here, but Sam doesn't get it. There's two different meanings of God, and I think, and this is why Jordan keeps talking about God psychologically. There's an image. There's so God number two. There's room for God number two, but the ontology of God number two, Jordan. That's where Jordan kind of draws his line and says that I'm not going to go there. I'm trying to stay within this box here, and so the resurrection, because that's suddenly where the resurrection, where things start getting a little, well, what are the limits of this? And that's how Jordan keeps answering the resurrection question. Now, God number one way of conceptualizing the long development of the a priori structure is the idea of God. And that's the best word. That's the compression. That's the compression we need in order to actually live well in the universe, and why we keep defaulting to it and using other words like universe or great spirit or something like that, because we can't help but actually manage ourselves within this very rich context without these ideas. It's the sum of biological and willful agency through time. Its values colonizing biology. It's represented in stories passed along and refined in Darwinian fashion. And you can hear Jordan make these points in both the Transliminal series or some of the best interviews that Jordan did, Jordan with another Jordan. Now, and this is where we begin to get into some of the videos that I've been doing over the last 6 months where we talk about the meta-divine realm versus the Hebrew God. Because the scientific vision approaches the world as if there are no norms. And Peterson points that out in the Transliminal, because we take the norms out. And where was I reading? Did I have that on a video? Did I have that in one of my conversations? Oh yeah, it was in my conversation with Lars, the Swede, where we talked about trolls, where Odin, you take out one of Odin's eyes so that he can have power over the world. And that's in a sense exactly what we do with the scientific vision, is we take out the eye of the manifest vision to gain a certain amount of power and mastery. We get rid of the normative in order to have a monarchical, two-dimensional vision of the world in order to gain power over it. But our biological cultural hybrid history is, of course, full of value agents colonizing blind objects. Okay? We see and respond to the agency of the arena. And so I'm taking the Vervaeke agent arena, and of course the Hebrews conceptualize, and this is where, again, every time these celebrity atheists talk about God as Woden or Zeus, and I think Peterson actually gets it wrong here too, because Peterson should read Kaufman. Jordan, if you're listening, I'm doing a Freddy here, read this book. Because what the Hebrews do is God is no longer, and look at my conversations with Brett Sockold, God is not in the system. God is the arena who writes himself into the story. And again, the analogy, it's not a perfect analogy, I know, but how could Frodo find Tolkien? Can Frodo find J.R.R. Tolkien anywhere in Middle-earth? Not going to find him in Isengard, not going to find him in Mordor, not going to find him in Minas Tirith, but Tolkien is everywhere. And then the Dorothy Sayers illustration that Tim Keller uses often. Dorothy Sayers, friend of Tolkien and Lewis. Dorothy Sayers so loves her books, and Dorothy Sayers in that sense is the arena. She creates the arena, and then she writes herself into the story. And that's in a sense what happens with Christianity. That you find this in the Old Testament with the angel of the Lord coming into the story and being an actor. So even in the Old Testament, the Father isn't merely the arena, and it's certainly not pantheism, because the arena does not exhaust God, just like Dorothy Sayers' books does not exhaust Dorothy Sayers, and J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth does not exhaust Tolkien. Now back to the fact-value distinction. A pile of facts does not a value make. That's the difference between the manifest and the scientific image. But values have been colonizing the facts we see for a very long time. And there are layers built into both the divorcee and the institution of marriage that few are cognizant of. There are layers built into us as parents. Again, as language acquirers. All of this stuff is built in. So you have the fact-value distinction, which is a really helpful distinction, but the values have been colonizing the facts for a very long time, and that has been built into us. Now when you get into Peterson and Scruton, I didn't make a link, or did I make a link here? Well, I better check it out. Now this is, of course, Peterson later, and I would have preferred Jordan to not spend so much time on the culture war stuff. But he gets there honestly, because competence is this capacity stalking the conversation with Sam Harris and stalking the end of history stuff that Brett and Eric Weinstein are putting out is the question of the good. And Sam Harris just always simply assumes the good. And Jordan Peterson basically calls him on it at one point because Sam Harris wants to say love and rationality. And Jordan says, you just basically took Christianity. And again, go back and look at some of the John Gray videos that I did about, the videos about John Gray and Tom Holland and assuming Christianity. So when Jordan here talks with Roger Scruton about basically competence versus tyranny, it's the idea that the universe is such a thing that there's not a zero-sum game. So I'll play the clip.
Well, and there's also ways of
Well, what's interesting about this conversation is they're trying to apprehend the transcendent. Okay, well, what do we mean by that? Well, what is the transcendent? The transcendent is God number 2, holy, holy, holy. The whole earth is full of his glory. That's God number 1. So how can we apprehend the transcendent? Well, we apprehend the transcendent when we understand that competence functions. And you can read Andy Crouch for this in the books that he's written on power. Competence functions in a life-giving, flourishing, generous way that tyranny doesn't. And this is, I think, a natural law argument that God is not finally and fundamentally a tyrant. This, of course, as a Christian, I would say, gets exemplified in the donation of Christ giving his life, in a sense, for the sins of the world, but also as payment to the Father. And we can look at all the different atonement theories that Christianity has come up with.
of providing a pathway forward by making the Foucauldian arguments, let's say, about power more high resolution. And one of the things that I do in my lectures, in my public lectures, that I think is rather comical, is to take and poke fun in some sense about the idea of power as the fundamental foundation for the hierarchical structures of the West. I think, well, you can think of the West as one large-scale, low-resolution, totalitarian tyranny, the tyranny of the patriarchy, or you can decompose that, which is, in some sense, is to transcend the concept. And I think, well, I ask my audiences what they think about the tyranny of plumbers or the tyranny of massage therapists. Well, because it's dead relevant. It's like, let's say you need a plumber, and you do need a plumber. Everyone agrees that you need a plumber, and because there's hell to pay otherwise. And then the question is, well, how is it that you go about selecting a plumber? And the answer isn't that there are roving bands of tyrannical plumbers that go door to door telling housewives that if they don't use their services, the service of the most tyrannical plumber, that there'll be mafia-like consequences. What happens instead is that you look for the plumber who is most able, in your estimation, and in his reputation as distributed through the community, for being able to fix pipes and run a business and engage in an honest transaction with you. And that's competence. That's not power. You see, and what I see as most...
And now a little bit of language thing, because I think he's not really contrasting competence and power, because when that group is using the word power, they're really saying tyranny. Because the plumber has power, and what the plumber does is uses their power for the flourishing of the customer and the functioning of the customer's house to afford all sorts of other things. And we would argue that, well, is God a tyrant? Well, why would the earth function as well as it does?
Most corrosive about the postmodern types, especially those who've derived themselves from Foucault, let's say, is that the idea that every hierarchy, or the hierarchy as such, is predicated on power is actually an assault on the idea of competence itself. And that, in turn, is an assault on the idea that there are real problems that can actually be solved. Well, then if you dispense with all that, and it's only power, there's no real problems to be solved, and there's no noble ways of solving them, even in as concrete a manner as a good plumber would solve them, which is not a trivial thing. And so then you deprive people of that sense of purpose in their life, even at the high resolution levels. And I've insisted in my lectures that.
And I would argue that this vision of God that is revealed, I'm going to use that word, Sam, that is revealed in a plumber is very much the vision of the Hebrew God. It's not the Greek God who won't get his hands dirty. And it's a God who loves materiality, and a God who seeds within us and within our communities the glory of a well-functioning drain. Well, you might think, well, what would be glorious about a well-functioning drain? We'll have a drain that isn't glorious. And that's different from the tyrant who, in a sense, is the explosion of ego that wants to consume everything for itself. That's the picture of Sauron. And so God, in his alignment with competence, means that the God revealed by the system is one that cares for the flourishing of the little creatures. And now, again, Christians assert this is a broken world. It's not functioning as it should. And the reason it's not functioning as it should is human responsibility. Okay? That gets really complicated. I'm not going to go off into that. Now, then Scruton and Peterson will go into the question of are received institutions so corrupted that zero-sum relationships are impossible? And this is where you get into the relationality, because the relationship between the customer and the plumber is both use power, that the customer uses the power built into, let's say, the money that is going to be exchanged to the plumber for the service, and the plumber uses the competence and the glory of a well-functioning drain in exchange for that. And it's not a zero-sum relationship. And Peterson then in that video then goes into talk about the fact that let's say human relationships between each other, friendships or marriages, are not zero-sum. They are costly and they always bear the mark of sacrifice, yet they also bear the mark of glory, that they can be win-win. And it's not just simply a loss and exchange. And in fact, that then gets built into kind of the sacramental aspect of human sexuality, where it's self-donation, high risk, vulnerable, and then life-giving and bonding at the same time. Now they complain, and Sam Harris would be right there with them, that children of the serial divorcees blame the institution and the opposite sex and the sexual rivals in general, and they look to burn down the house, but burning down the house does not a better shelter make. Now, I wasn't able to find the clip, but in the 4 talks, there's one moment in which Peterson makes absolutely plain the fact that as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist, what he had noted is that when we don't have a fully integrated system, we don't function optimally. And I think about C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image. And whereas there's certainly, and Lewis fesses up to this in his book, The Discarded Image, there certainly were, we cannot go back to the medieval model, but the medieval model was so rich in meaning giving. And what the book I have on the screen here, George Marsden's The Soul of the American University, the subtitle of it is From Protestant Establishment to Established Non-Belief. What happens in this long process, and of course Charles Taylor writes about it, it's the meaning crisis C.S. Lewis writes about it. This has been going on for hundreds of years, where we've been systematically dismantling the system to bring us to a point where someone like Sam Harris would say, oh, well, being is obvious and we pursue it rationally, and here's love and that should be the system. And it's like, well, why is love at the top of the hierarchy? Tom Holland would say, because Jesus put it there, Sam. And you're not going to divorce that from Christianity. You can't, there's no need to smuggle Jesus in. And in fact, Peterson tags him on this and says, Sam, I don't need to smuggle Jesus in, because you did it when you smuggle in love at the top of the hierarchy. And so what we've seen in the West is the long divorce of the church from society. And in many questions, rightfully so, because Sam has a point about tyranny and when the church becomes tyrannical. But in some ways, ironically, the social justice warriors that Sam is complaining about are in many ways in bed with Sam in terms of this allergic reaction and suspicion of all institutions. A unified and integrated view of knowledge that includes God. Because again, if you look at God as broadly as Jordan Peterson, well, you can't, the only thing you can do is no longer use God for the God number one stuff and try to divorce God number two from the equation. And that's exactly what Harris does. And in many ways, Marsden's book is the story of that. And even though we still call them professors, what do you suspect they were professing? Again, read Marsden's book and you'll see the story of it. Is the decline of the humanities that Scruton and Peterson will note simply the logical conclusion to this process? God number one has been renamed, and deism has taken over, and God number two divorced. So first you deconstruct and you split God number one from God number two. That really happens in deism. So we can begin to manipulate, and that's a long, slow process, but to the degree that when Jordan Peterson reads, Jordan, what do you mean by God? And he starts reading these things. And Sam Harris, it isn't recognizable to Sam or how many people that Jordan is talking about what all of the ancients understood to be God. So you deconstruction of God number one and the exile of God number two. The value question still haunts. What is good? How can we know it? How can we walk through a cornfield? Sam says, you can find your way, but ironically, not much different from use the force, Luke. It's just natural to know what the good is. Is it really? And again, Brett tags him on this often, as does Douglas Murray, but Sam's practice is dog and react. And then he carts out his usual arguments. And again, my plea is, well, I'd like to see Jordan get well and take his time at it, and be refreshed and rested, and then look for better conversation partners. Because what Jordan so clearly wants to do in these conversations is get down to the devil in the details, as he keeps saying, but Sam won't play that game with Jordan. Sam basically says it's obvious how to get through the cornfield. And Jordan Peterson says from an evolutionary perspective, you need all the help you can get. And so that's why we talk to the ancients. Well, we'll see if this works as a short version and a long version. I don't know that it necessarily worked. This has been pretty long. I'll have to do a little cutting and pasting to get in it. So I'll put this out tomorrow, and let me know what you think about the long and the short versions of it. I don't know if that really works. Maybe my short versions have to be a whole lot shorter, and this other process that I'm playing with doesn't really work. But anyway, thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful.